The most dangerous words are rarely shouted. Sometimes, they are whispered just loudly enough for the wrong person to hear. Emma Carter had spent 3 years serving meals without anyone remembering her face. She preferred it that way. Inside Blackthorn Castle, invisible people survived the longest. The grand ballroom glittered beneath hundreds of crystal chandeliers, their warm candlelight dancing across polished marble floors and banners embroidered with silver wolves. Noble families filled the room with effortless laughter, while musicians played elegant melodies that echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling. Crystal goblets clinked together. Servants moved silently between long banquet tables. Every smile, every toast, every graceful bow celebrated a single occasion: the engagement of Alpha King Nathaniel Brooks. No expense had been spared. Fresh white roses climbed every stone column. Golden ribbons draped from the balconies above. Outside the towering windows, workers prepared an extravagant fireworks display that would illuminate the entire valley before midnight. To everyone present, it looked like the happiest night the kingdom had seen in years. Emma balanced a polished silver tray against one hand, carefully weaving between laughing nobles without disturbing a single conversation. She wore the same plain brown waitress dress every servant received upon entering the royal household. A neatly tied cream-colored apron covered the front of her dress, while her blonde hair rested beneath a simple linen cap that made her almost disappear among dozens of other servers. No jewels, no family crest, no title, only another girl carrying wine. Exactly as everyone expected. A steward pointed toward the eastern reception room. More wine. Emma nodded quietly. Yes, sir. She collected 2 crystal bottles and followed the narrow corridor leading away from the crowded ballroom. The music became softer with every step. The laughter faded behind heavy oak doors. Only the distant crackling of fireplaces remained. As she approached the private reception chamber reserved for members of the royal family, she noticed something unusual. The door wasn't fully closed, only slightly open. That alone wasn't strange. The voices inside were low, urgent, nothing like the cheerful conversations filling the ballroom. Emma slowed instinctively, not to listen, simply to avoid interrupting. She reached for the door. Then she heard a woman's voice. Cool, elegant, perfectly controlled. Everything is ready. Emma froze. She recognized the voice immediately. Lady Victoria Sinclair, the Alpha King's fiancée. Another voice answered. A man. Deep. Careful. No mistakes. There can't be. Victoria replied without hesitation. There won't be. Emma lowered her eyes, intending to leave before anyone noticed her standing outside. Servants were never meant to overhear private conversations. The safest choice was to walk away. She shifted the tray slightly. One crystal glass touched another. A tiny sound, barely audible. Inside the room, silence fell. Emma held her breath. After several long seconds, footsteps approached the door. She stepped backward into the shadow beside a velvet curtain just before it opened. A tall beta officer emerged first, adjusting the cuff of his dark ceremonial uniform. His eyes swept calmly across the empty corridor. Satisfied, he walked away without noticing her hidden behind the heavy folds of fabric. Lady Victoria remained inside the room. Emma waited until the footsteps disappeared completely. She should leave now. She knew that. Instead, one sentence drifted through the narrow opening before the door slowly closed again. Once the fireworks began, Victoria paused. Her voice became almost gentle. He won't leave this castle alive. Emma's fingers loosened around the silver tray. A crystal goblet slipped from its edge. She caught it just before it struck the floor. The glass never shattered. But in that single whispered sentence, the celebration inside Blackthorn Castle suddenly transformed into something far more terrifying than a royal engagement. It had become the perfect place for a king to die. The most convincing lies are the ones wrapped inside a celebration. Emma remained frozen behind the heavy velvet curtain long after the footsteps had faded into silence. Her heartbeat echoed louder than the music drifting from the ballroom. He won't leave this castle alive. The sentence repeated inside her mind again and again. She wanted to believe she had misunderstood. Perhaps they were discussing someone else. Perhaps it was part of a security exercise. Perhaps Lady Victoria's words meant something entirely different. But every instinct told her otherwise. Emma carefully lifted the silver tray once more and stepped away from the reception room. forcing herself to walk instead of run. Running attracted attention. Attention invited questions. Questions could become dangerous. As she returned to the grand ballroom, the magnificent celebration unfolded exactly as it had only minutes before. Nothing had changed. That was the terrifying part. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead like stars suspended inside the castle ceiling. Musicians performed an elegant waltz while noble couples glided gracefully across the marble floor. Servants carried silver platters filled with roasted pheasant, fresh bread, berries, and crystal glasses sparkling with ruby-colored wine. Laughter filled every corner. No one looked afraid. No one suspected that death had already received an invitation. Emma quietly resumed serving drinks. A smiling duchess accepted a glass without even looking at her. A nobleman laughed loudly while discussing tomorrow's hunting tournament. Two young ladies admired Lady Victoria's engagement ring. The entire kingdom celebrated a future that might never come. Then the royal herald struck the marble floor with his ceremonial staff. His Majesty. The hall immediately fell silent. Alpha King Nathaniel Brooks. Every guest turned toward the grand staircase. Nathaniel descended slowly beneath the golden banners of House Brooks. Tall, broad-shouldered, his black ceremonial coat, embroidered with silver thread, rested perfectly beneath a dark wolf fur cloak fastened with the royal crest. His calm blue eyes swept across the crowded ballroom, acknowledging nobles and warriors alike with quiet confidence earned through years of leadership. He looked every inch the king people believed could never be defeated. Beside the staircase waited Lady Victoria Sinclair. She smiled with flawless elegance. Beautiful, graceful, completely composed. She extended her hand toward Nathaniel as though nothing in the world could disturb this perfect evening. Emma watched them from across the room. Only moments earlier, she had heard that same woman calmly discussing the king's death. Yet now, Victoria's eyes sparkled with affection convincing enough to fool everyone around her. Nathaniel gently kissed her hand. The ballroom erupted into applause. Emma felt her stomach tighten. How could someone smile like that? How could someone look at the man she planned to betray and pretend to love him so completely? Her thoughts were interrupted when another waitress brushed past her carrying fresh wine. Emma. She looked up. Table 12 needs another bottle. Emma nodded automatically. I'll bring it. As she crossed the ballroom once more, something caught her attention. Near one of the side entrances stood the same beta officer she had seen leaving the private reception room. He wasn't watching the celebration. He wasn't watching the king. He was watching the exits. His gaze moved carefully from one doorway to another, silently counting guards, servants, and guests. Then he made a small gesture with two fingers, almost invisible. Across the room, a palace servant immediately disappeared through another corridor. Emma stopped walking. That wasn't coincidence. One whispered conversation, one suspicious officer, one hidden signal. The pieces were beginning to fit together. She slowly lifted her eyes toward the towering windows overlooking the castle courtyard. Outside, workers were arranging the final crates beneath the enormous fireworks platform, a platform positioned directly above the eastern exit. The very exit Alpha King Nathaniel always used after every royal banquet. For the first time that evening, Emma no longer wondered whether Lady Victoria had spoken the truth. She realized something far worse. The trap was already in place, and the celebration was moving exactly according to someone's plan. A trap only succeeds when every piece falls into place. Emma realized she was watching those pieces move before her eyes. She forced herself to keep walking. The silver tray in her hands suddenly felt heavier than iron, yet her expression remained calm. Years of serving impatient nobles had taught her one priceless skill. Never let your face reveal your thoughts. She reached table 12 and poured wine into crystal goblets with steady hands. The elderly duke smiled politely. Thank you. Emma returned a small nod. My pleasure, my lord. Inside, her thoughts raced faster than the musicians' violins. Fireworks. The eastern exit. The beta officer. Victoria's whispered promise. Nothing about tonight was accidental. As she moved toward the next table, she deliberately slowed her pace near one of the castle's enormous windows. Outside, servants dressed in dark work uniforms continued arranging wooden crates beneath the fireworks platform. One crate slipped from a worker's hands. Its lid shifted open for only a second. Emma expected colorful fireworks. Instead, She caught a brief glimpse of polished iron chains. The lid slammed shut immediately. Another worker glanced around before helping lift the crate back into position. No one laughed. No one complained. They worked in complete silence. Emma's pulse quickened. Fireworks didn't require iron chains. Something else had been hidden inside those crates. She looked away before anyone noticed her watching. Emma. The sharp voice belonged to the head steward. You've stopped moving. She immediately straightened. My apologies. The king's table. Fresh wine. Now. Yes, sir. Emma accepted a crystal decanter and carefully walked toward the royal table positioned beneath the grand chandelier. Every step brought her closer to Nathaniel Brooks, closer to the only man who needed to hear the truth, and farther inside the danger surrounding him. Nathaniel stood speaking with foreign ambassadors while Victoria greeted noble guests beside him. She laughed gracefully, touched people's hands, accepted congratulations. Every movement appeared effortless. Emma wondered whether anyone besides herself could hear the lie hidden beneath that smile. Probably not. As she approached the royal table, 2 members of the king's guard crossed their halberds before her. Halt. She lowered her eyes respectfully. Fresh wine for His Majesty. One guard inspected the decanter. The other searched the serving tray. Only after several silent moments did they step aside. Emma carefully filled Nathaniel's glass. He never looked at her. Kings rarely noticed the servants standing inches away. She didn't blame him. Invisible people existed precisely because no one expected them to matter. As she stepped back, another movement caught her attention. Victoria. For the briefest instant, the future queen turned toward the ballroom entrance. She gently adjusted the sapphire bracelet around her wrist. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. Except, the beta officer standing near the eastern doors answered by touching the silver ring on his own hand. One gesture, one reply, silent, perfectly timed. Emma felt the pieces locked together. Those weren't random habits. They were signals. Her gaze drifted upward once more. Beyond the balcony windows, workers had already climbed beneath the fireworks platform. One of them quietly disappeared behind the stone supports directly above the eastern exit. Emma's breathing slowed. If Nathaniel followed his usual routine, he would leave through that passage the moment the fireworks began. Exactly when everyone would be looking toward the sky. Exactly when no one would notice danger above them. She looked at the king again, still smiling, still greeting guests, completely unaware that every step of his evening had already been planned by someone standing only a few feet away. Emma understood something with painful clarity. She couldn't shout across the ballroom. She couldn't accuse Lady Victoria in front of the court without proof. No one would believe a waitress over the king's fiancée. There was only one chance left. She had to place the truth directly into Nathaniel's hands. Before the first firework lit the night sky. Sometimes the hardest part of saving a king is convincing him to listen before it is too late. Emma stepped away from the royal table, but her mind refused to leave it. She had confirmed everything she feared. The hidden signals. The suspicious crates. The planned escape route. Every clue pointed toward the same conclusion. Nathaniel Brooks was walking straight into a carefully prepared assassination. Yet she remained nothing more than a waitress. A servant whose voice carried no authority. She moved toward the servants' corridor behind the ballroom, hoping to find Captain Darius, commander of the King's Guard. If anyone would act quickly, it would be him. Halfway down the corridor, she finally saw him issuing orders to several royal guards. Relief washed over her. She hurried forward. Captain, a guard immediately stepped between them. State your business. I must speak with Captain Darius. He is occupied. It's urgent. The guard frowned. So is every servant's request. Emma swallowed. It concerns His Majesty. That sentence instantly changed the atmosphere. Captain Darius turned toward her. His sharp gray eyes studied the young waitress for only a moment before he approached. What about the king? Emma lowered her voice. I overheard something. Before she could continue, another voice interrupted. There you are. The head steward appeared from the opposite hallway, his expression already dark with irritation. Emma Carter, your station is the ballroom. She glanced desperately toward Darius. I only need 1 minute. You've already taken too many. The steward folded his arms. Go back to work. Darius looked between them. The girl says it concerns His Majesty. The steward answered immediately. She's nervous. It's her first royal engagement. Nothing more. Emma shook her head. No. I heard Lady Victoria. The steward's face changed instantly. His polite expression vanished. He stepped closer until only inches separated them. Careful. His voice remained calm. Too calm. Do you understand what happens to servants who spread rumors about the royal family? Emma felt every nearby guard watching. No one spoke. No one defended her. She realized the steward wasn't simply protecting royal etiquette. He was making sure she stayed silent. Captain Darius studied her carefully. Do you have proof? Emma opened her mouth, then stopped. Proof. She had none. Only whispered words. Only suspicious movements. Only instinct. Against the future queen. The answer was painfully obvious. Darius sighed quietly. Return to your duties. If you hear anything concrete. He paused. Come directly to me. Emma nodded slowly. Yes, Captain. She turned away. Not because she had accepted defeat. Because she understood something even more dangerous. By speaking Victoria's name aloud, she had revealed that she knew far too much. As Emma re-entered the ballroom, she felt eyes following her. Not the curious looks of nobles. Not the bored glances of servants. Someone was watching her deliberately. She pretended not to notice. While carrying another tray of wine, she caught a reflection inside one of the polished silver serving platters. The beta officer. He stood across the room, looking directly at her. The moment their eyes nearly met, he calmly looked away, as though nothing had happened. Emma's heartbeat quickened. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to understand she had become a problem. Across the ballroom, Lady Victoria accepted another round of congratulations with her flawless smile. Then, while embracing an elderly duchess, she lifted her eyes for the briefest instant. Her gaze settled on Emma, only for a heartbeat. A tiny smile touched the corner of Victoria's lips. It wasn't warm. It wasn't friendly. It was the smile of someone who had just realized a witness was still alive. Emma suddenly understood there was no longer time to persuade anyone. Every passing minute made the trap stronger. Every passing minute made her own survival less certain. She could no longer rely on guards. She could no longer rely on protocol. If Nathaniel Brooks was going to leave this castle alive, she would have to place the warning into his hands herself. A kingdom can ignore a waitress. A handwritten warning is much harder to dismiss. Emma slipped into the servants' pantry and quietly closed the door behind her. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself a single deep breath. Her hands were trembling, not from fear alone, from time. Outside, the musicians had begun playing a brighter melody. The fireworks would begin soon. She looked around the small room until her eyes landed on a stack of folded linen napkins beside a wooden writing desk used to record banquet supplies. There was no parchment, no official seal, only a small bottle of ink and a worn graphite pencil. It would have to be enough. Emma tore a clean corner from a linen inventory sheet. The piece was barely larger than the palm of her hand. She hesitated. How could she convince a king with only a few words? There wasn't room for explanations. No room for names. No room for evidence. Only one chance. She lowered the pencil. Her handwriting remained surprisingly steady. Your fiancé set a trap. Leave now. She stared at the sentence. Simple. Direct. Terrifying. If anyone found this note before Nathaniel did, she would almost certainly be arrested for treason. She folded the paper twice until it became no larger than a coin. Then she tucked it beneath the cuff of her sleeve. The ballroom doors opened as she returned. The celebration had reached its height. Musicians played triumphantly. Guests raised their glasses. Servants hurried through endless rows of nobles carrying silver trays filled with wine. Above them, the massive crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across smiling faces. Emma searched the room. Nathaniel stood near the center of the ballroom, accepting congratulations from visiting rulers. Victoria remained beside him, graceful as ever, laughing softly at every compliment. No one could have guessed she was counting the final minutes before the attack. Emma lifted another tray of crystal goblets. This time she volunteered without being asked. The king's table. The steward barely looked at her. Go. She crossed the ballroom one careful step at a time. Every movement had to appear ordinary. Nothing hurried. Nothing suspicious. One servant passing among dozens. A nobleman stepped into her path. She paused politely. Another servant crossed in front of her, carrying roasted pheasant. She adjusted her course. Closer. Only a few yards remained. Nathaniel accepted another toast. His attention never drifted toward her. Victoria, however, noticed everything. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met. Emma immediately lowered her gaze. Not too quickly, not too slowly, just enough to avoid suspicion. She reached the royal table. A guard inspected the wine. Satisfied, he nodded. Emma leaned forward to refill Nathaniel's crystal goblet. The folded note rested inside her sleeve. One smooth movement. No hesitation. As the bottle tilted, her left hand slipped naturally beneath the edge of the silver charger. The tiny folded paper slid silently beside the king's goblet, hidden beneath the shadow of its polished base. No sound, no sudden gesture. Only another waitress serving another glass of wine. Emma stepped back. Her heart pounded so violently she feared someone might hear it. She turned away before anyone noticed the note. 5 steps. 10. 15. Then she heard Victoria's gentle laughter behind her. Emma resisted every urge to look back. Instead, she continued serving guests as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Several endless moments passed. Then, from across the ballroom, Nathaniel reached for his goblet. His fingers paused. Something beneath the glass caught his attention. Without changing his expression, he lifted the goblet slightly. The folded paper appeared beneath it. For the first time that evening, the Alpha King's calm blue eyes narrowed as he quietly unfolded the message hidden by a waitress no one had bothered to notice. A king who survives a trap is dangerous. A king who knows who warned him is unstoppable. Nathaniel Brooks never changed his expression. To everyone watching, he appeared to be reading another congratulatory note from a noble guest. He unfolded the tiny piece of paper beneath the table, shielding it with the sleeve of his ceremonial coat. Only 7 words greeted him. Your fiancé set a trap. Leave now. His blue eyes lingered on the message for only a heartbeat. Then he folded it once more and slipped it inside his glove. Not a single person nearby noticed. Years of ruling had taught him one lesson above all others. Never reveal the moment you discover an enemy. Across the ballroom, Emma continued serving wine as though nothing had happened. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to look toward the king. She refused. If Nathaniel intended to believe her, he had to appear completely unaware. Lady Victoria rested one elegant hand upon his arm. My king. Her smile remained flawless. The fireworks will begin shortly. I thought our guests would enjoy watching them from the eastern terrace. Nathaniel met her eyes with the same calm warmth he had shown throughout the evening. An excellent suggestion. Emma nearly stopped breathing. The eastern terrace. Exactly where she feared he was being led. Nathaniel turned toward Captain Darius. Have the procession prepared. Yes, Your Majesty. The captain bowed immediately. Everything appeared normal. Everything unfolded exactly as Victoria expected. Only Nathaniel knew that the plan had already changed. As musicians announced the beginning of the fireworks celebration, nobles slowly followed the royal couple toward the eastern corridor. Hundreds of footsteps echoed across polished marble. Emma joined the line of servants carrying lanterns behind the guests. She needed to see what happened. The corridor opened onto a magnificent stone terrace overlooking the valley below. Night had settled across the mountains. The first fireworks hissed softly as attendants prepared the fuses. Nathaniel walked several steps toward the eastern staircase. Then, without warning, he stopped. He glanced toward Captain Darius. Almost imperceptibly, he adjusted the clasp of his wolf fur cloak. To everyone else, it looked like a simple gesture. To Darius, it was an old battlefield signal. Change the route. Immediately, the captain reacted without hesitation. Your Majesty. He stepped forward. The western balcony offers a clearer view tonight. Nathaniel nodded thoughtfully. Very well. He turned away from the eastern staircase. Victoria's smile faltered. Only for a fraction of a second. Then she recovered. If you prefer. Before she could finish, the first firework exploded overhead. Brilliant gold illuminated the castle walls. Guests raised their heads toward the sky. Cheers erupted across the terrace. Then came another sound. A deafening crack. The massive stone balcony above the eastern staircase suddenly gave way. Ancient support beams snapped with explosive force. Enormous blocks of carved stone crashed directly onto the path Nathaniel had been walking toward only moments earlier. Dust erupted into the night air. People screamed. Crystal lanterns shattered across the courtyard. The entire eastern passage disappeared beneath tons of broken masonry. Silence followed. No one moved. No one spoke. Every noble stared at the destroyed staircase in absolute disbelief. If Nathaniel had taken 5 more steps, he would have been standing beneath it. Emma felt her knees weaken. She had been right. Across the drifting cloud of dust, Nathaniel slowly turned his head. Not toward the collapsed balcony. Not toward the terrified guests. His eyes searched the crowd of servants. Until they found Emma. For the first time since the banquet began, the Alpha King looked directly at the waitress who had warned him. He said nothing. His expression remained unreadable. But Emma understood the meaning in his steady gaze. He knew. And somewhere behind the terrified silence, Lady Victoria finally realized the impossible. Someone had warned the king before her trap could claim its victim. The moment a failed trap leaves no corpse behind, the hunters begin searching for the witness instead. Dust still drifted through the cold night air. The shattered stones covering the eastern staircase silenced the celebration more effectively than any royal command ever could. Guests stood frozen. Some stared at the collapsed balcony. Others stared at Alpha King Nathaniel Brooks. Only Lady Victoria recovered quickly enough to speak. "My king." She rushed toward him, her face filled with perfectly measured panic. "Thank the moon you're safe." Nathaniel looked at the ruins before answering calmly. "It appears fortune favored us tonight." Victoria slipped her arm around his. "We must return inside immediately. There could be another collapse." Nathaniel nodded. A wise precaution. To everyone watching, they looked like a frightened couple escaping a terrible accident. Emma knew better. Victoria wasn't afraid of another collapse. She was afraid the first one had failed. Royal guards quickly surrounded the king and escorted the nobles back into the grand ballroom. Musicians had stopped playing. Servants extinguished fallen lanterns while physicians hurried to examine the injured. The joyful engagement banquet had transformed into organized chaos. Emma quietly picked up broken crystal near one of the marble columns, trying to disappear once again. Then she felt it. Someone standing behind her. "You." The voice was low, controlled. Emma turned slowly. The beta officer stood only a few feet away. His expression remained polite. Too polite. "You served the king's table tonight." It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "What was your name?" "Emma Carter." He smiled faintly. "I don't believe we've met." "No, sir." His eyes drifted toward her empty serving tray. "You seemed very busy this evening." "I was only doing my job." For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Then footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Captain Darius approached. "The king requests every servant assigned to the royal table remain inside the castle." The beta officer stepped back immediately. "Of course." He bowed respectfully before disappearing into the crowd. Emma watched him leave. She didn't need proof anymore. He had been testing her, trying to discover whether she knew something. Captain Darius noticed her pale face. "Are you injured?" "No, Captain." "Good." His voice remained calm. "But no one leaves the castle until sunrise." Emma nodded. "Yes, Captain." As Darius walked away, Emma noticed 2 guards quietly taking positions near every exit. No one was escaping tonight, including the conspirators. Were there witnesses? High above the ballroom, inside a private gallery overlooking the hall, Nathaniel stood alone beside a narrow window. The folded note rested in his hand once more. He read the 7 words again. "Your fiancée set a trap. Leave now." No signature. No explanation. Only the unmistakable handwriting of someone who had risked everything. Darius entered quietly. The eastern support beams were cut deliberately. Nathaniel did not look away from the window. Not an accident. No. The tools disappeared before we secured the area. Nathaniel remained silent. After a moment he asked, "The waitress, Emma Carter, what do we know about her?" "Very little. 23 years old. Employed here for 3 years. No disciplinary record. No noble connections." Nathaniel folded the note carefully. Someone believed her warning enough to risk death. Darius frowned. "You think she wrote it?" "I know she did. And if she was right about the trap." Nathaniel's gaze settled across the crowded ballroom below. Emma quietly served frightened guests as though she wanted nothing except to become invisible again. Then someone will try to silence her before dawn. At that exact moment, on the opposite side of the ballroom, Lady Victoria accepted a fresh glass of wine with an elegant smile. Without lifting her eyes toward Emma, she gently brushed 2 fingers across the rim of the crystal goblet. Across the hall, the same beta officer saw the signal. He gave the slightest nod. Emma never noticed. But the order had already been given. The king had survived. Now the waitress had to disappear. The truth does not become powerful when it is spoken. It becomes powerful when someone finally finds the proof. Midnight settled over Blackthorn Castle. The celebration had ended, but no one had been allowed to leave. Royal guards stood at every entrance. Servants whispered nervously in the corridors. The collapse of the eastern balcony had already spread through the castle like wildfire. Officially, it was being called an accident. Unofficially, everyone knew the Alpha King did not believe that. Emma remained inside the servants' quarters, pretending to polish silver trays while listening to every footstep beyond the wooden door. She understood why she had not been arrested. Nathaniel was protecting the investigation. But she also understood something else. Victoria would never wait patiently for the truth to catch her. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. 3 short knocks. Then one. Emma opened the door cautiously. Captain Darius stood outside. "You'll come with me." His voice revealed nothing. Emma nodded without asking questions. The captain led her through narrow stone hallways rarely used by servants. Neither of them spoke until they reached a small council chamber lit by only 2 candles. Nathaniel Brooks stood beside a long oak table. The folded note rested before him. He looked directly at Emma. "You wrote this." It was not a question. Emma lowered her head. "Yes, Your Majesty. Everything written here." Nathaniel's voice remained calm. "Was true. I believed it was." "You believe?" Emma took a slow breath. "I heard Lady Victoria speaking with a beta officer. I saw signals exchanged. I saw unusual crates beneath the fireworks platform. I had no proof. I only knew that if I stayed silent." She stopped. Nathaniel finished the sentence quietly. "I would have died." Emma nodded. "Yes." Silence filled the room. Captain Darius unfolded several items collected after the collapse. A broken iron chain, a specialized stone cutting blade, fragments of a support pin removed from the balcony, all recovered beneath the eastern platform. Nathaniel studied them carefully. Enough to prove sabotage, not enough to prove who ordered it. Emma looked at the objects. Then something caught her attention. The chain. A small brass clasp still hung from one end. Her eyes widened. "I've seen that." Both men looked toward her. "Where?" Emma stepped closer. She pointed at the engraved symbol pressed into the metal. A falcon surrounded by 3 tiny stars. The Sinclair household. Nathaniel remained silent. Emma continued. "Before coming to Blackthorn Castle, I worked for Lady Victoria's uncle. He owned a hunting estate. Every restraint used for transporting trained hunting wolves carried this exact maker's mark." She touched the engraving carefully. The blacksmith never sold them outside the Sinclair family. Captain Darius exchanged a quick glance with the king. Nathaniel spoke immediately. "The blacksmith." Darius understood at once. "I'll bring him before sunrise." The captain left without another word. Emma finally understood why memory had returned so suddenly. The symbol wasn't rare. It was familiar. Something she had seen every day during her first years as a servant. Nathaniel folded his hands behind his back. "For 3 years. He said quietly. "You never mentioned serving the Sinclair household." Emma lowered her eyes. No one ever asked. A faint silence followed. Then Nathaniel gave the smallest nod. The truth often survives inside the smallest details. Outside the chamber, hurried footsteps echoed through the corridor. Moments later, Captain Darius returned. His normally controlled expression had changed. "My king, the royal treasury has confirmed something." Nathaniel turned. "What is it?" The beta officer assigned to Lady Victoria's escort disappeared less than 5 minutes ago. Another guard stepped into the doorway. He wasn't alone. Darius's voice hardened. "We searched his quarters." "What did you find?" The guard swallowed. "A hidden chest, filled with Sinclair gold." Nathaniel slowly looked toward Emma. The waitress who had possessed nothing but a whispered warning had just uncovered the first piece of evidence that could destroy the most powerful engagement in the kingdom. Justice means very little if it is whispered in secret. It must be spoken where everyone can hear it. 3 days later, the great hall of Blackthorn Castle stood silent beneath towering stone arches. No musicians played. No banners celebrated an engagement. The flowers that had decorated the royal banquet had already been removed. In their place stood rows of royal guards. Nobles filled both sides of the chamber, their quiet conversations ending the moment Alpha King Nathaniel Brooks entered. His expression revealed nothing. Captain Darius followed close behind. Between two lines of guards walked Lady Victoria Sinclair. She still wore an elegant royal gown. She still carried herself with perfect dignity. Only the iron restraints around her wrists betrayed how completely her world had changed. Moments later, another group entered the hall. The missing beta officer, the blacksmith from the Sinclair estate, two servants responsible for transporting the fireworks crates, and finally, Emma Carter. She wore the same modest waitress uniform she had worn on the night of the banquet. No jewels, no title, no symbol of rank. Many nobles looked confused. Why had a waitress been summoned before the royal court? Nathaniel slowly rose from the throne. The investigation is complete. His calm voice echoed through the hall. The collapse beneath the eastern balcony was no accident. Captain Darius stepped forward. One by one, he placed the recovered evidence upon a long wooden table. The specialized cutting blade, the sabotaged support pin, the Sinclair-marked restraint chain, a heavy chest overflowing with Sinclair gold recovered from the beta officer's quarters. Finally, several signed payment letters bearing Victoria Sinclair's personal seal. A quiet murmur swept through the court. Victoria remained perfectly composed. This proves nothing. The gold was stolen. The seal was forged. The servants are lying. Nathaniel nodded once. I expected that answer. He looked toward the blacksmith. Who commissioned these chains? The old craftsman lowered his head. I forged them only for House Sinclair. No one else. Nathaniel turned toward the beta officer. You disappeared after the collapse. Silence. Captain Darius placed the chest of gold before him. Would you care to explain this? The officer closed his eyes. For several endless moments, no one breathed. Then his shoulders slowly fell. It was never supposed to fail. Gasps filled the great hall. He looked directly at Victoria. You promised no one would survive to question us. Victoria's calm expression shattered for the first time. You fool. She lunged toward him. Guards restrained her before she reached him. The king was supposed to die beneath the eastern balcony. The beta officer continued quietly. The fireworks were meant to hide the sound. Afterward, he lowered his head. Lady Victoria would inherit everything through marriage. Silence consumed the chamber. Every noble turned toward the woman they had admired only days before. Nathaniel never looked at Victoria. Instead, his eyes found Emma standing quietly near the back of the hall. The conspiracy succeeded in every detail. He said calmly, except one. He descended the steps from the throne. Every guard stepped aside. Every noble watched in complete silence. Nathaniel stopped before the young waitress. You heard a whisper. You were ignored. You had no proof. You knew no one would believe you. Emma lowered her eyes. I only knew I couldn't stay silent. Nathaniel reached inside his ceremonial coat. He unfolded the tiny piece of paper that had saved his life. The 7 handwritten words remained clearly visible. He raised the note high enough for the entire court to see. This, he said firmly, is the reason your king still lives. Not the swords, not the guards, not the walls of this castle. A single warning written by a waitress everyone overlooked. Nathaniel carefully folded the note once more before placing it back into Emma's hands. Then, before the assembled court, he removed the silver wolf brooch from his own cloak and fastened it gently upon her apron. From this day forward, his voice carried through every corner of the great hall. No one in this kingdom will ever call Emma Carter just a waitress again. She is under the direct protection of the Alpha King. Anyone who threatens her, Nathaniel's eyes swept across the silent nobles, threatens the crown itself. For the first time since she had entered Blackthorn Castle 3 years earlier, every person in the great hall stood, not for a queen, not for a noble, but for the quiet waitress whose courage had changed the fate of an entire kingdom. Respect cannot be given by a title. It is earned the moment people realize they were wrong about you. 1 week passed. Blackthorn Castle felt different. The corridors remained the same. The towering stone walls had not changed. The servants still hurried through the kitchens before sunrise. Yet every person inside the castle understood that something invisible had shifted. Emma Carter no longer walked through the halls unnoticed. As she entered the royal kitchens carrying a basket of fresh bread, conversations quietly stopped. Several young servants who had once hurried past without acknowledging her now stepped aside. Good morning, Miss Carter. Emma smiled politely. Good morning. The words still sounded unfamiliar. Miss Carter. Not waitress. Not servant. Not girl. Only her name. It was enough. She continued preparing the morning meal exactly as she always had. She still tied the same cream-colored apron around her waist. She still arranged wooden trays with careful precision. She still insisted on carrying her own work instead of asking others to do it. Nothing about her routine had changed. Only the way people looked at her. Some looked grateful. Others looked curious. A few still looked uncomfortable. It was difficult for proud nobles to accept that an ordinary waitress had succeeded where experienced guards had failed. Emma ignored every stare. Recognition had never been the reason she acted. Near midday, Captain Darius entered the kitchen. Every servant immediately straightened. He approached Emma directly. His Majesty requests your presence. The room fell silent. Emma nodded. I'll come immediately. She followed Darius through the familiar corridors until they reached the western gardens. Nathaniel Brooks stood beside a stone fountain overlooking the castle grounds. He wore no ceremonial cloak today, only a dark training coat with a simple leather belt. Without the throne behind him, he appeared less like a distant ruler and more like the warrior he had once been. He turned as Emma approached. You still work every morning. She smiled gently. The bread won't bake itself. For the first time, Nathaniel allowed himself a faint smile. No, I suppose it won't. Silence settled comfortably between them. Birds circled above the castle towers. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine through the gardens. Nathaniel finally spoke. I've reviewed your employment records. Emma waited quietly. You've refused promotion twice. Yes, Your Majesty. Why? She looked toward the fountain before answering. My parents taught me something. If you chase importance, you often stop noticing people. Nathaniel considered her answer. And yet you noticed what no one else did. Emma shook her head softly. I only paid attention. The guards were watching for enemies. The nobles were watching each other. I was watching people. Nathaniel remained silent. It was the simplest explanation he had heard since the conspiracy began. Perhaps also the truest. He reached inside his coat and removed the folded note once again. Its edges had begun to soften from repeated handling. I've carried this every day. Emma looked surprised. It belongs to you. Nathaniel shook his head. No, it belongs to the moment my kingdom changed. He carefully returned the note to his pocket. Then he looked directly at her. The Royal Council wants to reward you. Emma's expression remained calm. I don't need gold. I know. They offered land. I don't need land. They suggested a noble title. Emma smiled politely. I wouldn't know what to do with one. Nathaniel almost laughed. Almost. Then tell me. What do you want? Emma thought for several moments before answering. The servants' quarters leak every winter. The kitchen roof needs repairs. And the younger girls deserve someone to teach them to read. Nathaniel stared at her. She had just refused wealth, refused status, refused power, only to ask for better lives for people no one usually noticed. At that moment, Nathaniel understood something no investigation could ever reveal. Emma Carter had never risked her life to become important. She had simply refused to let another human being die when she knew she could stop it. That was precisely why no amount of honor could ever equal what she had already earned. The strongest loyalty is never demanded. It is freely given after kindness has already been shown. Autumn arrived quietly at Blackthorn Castle. Golden leaves drifted across the stone courtyards where frightened servants had once whispered about conspiracies and betrayal. Life had finally begun to feel ordinary again, at least on the surface. Emma still preferred beginning her mornings before sunrise. She enjoyed the peaceful silence before the kitchens filled with noise. As she crossed the herb garden carrying a basket of fresh rosemary, she heard soft laughter nearby. Children. She smiled. The castle's young pages had been practicing wooden sword drills under the supervision of retired guards. They rarely noticed anyone outside their little world. One small boy, no older than 8, struggled to lift a practice shield nearly as large as himself. The other boys laughed. You'll never be strong enough. The child lowered his head. Emma quietly placed her basket on a nearby stone bench. Without saying anything, she walked over and knelt beside him. May I? The boy nodded. She turned the shield sideways. You're trying to carry it with your arms. She gently adjusted his footing. Use your legs. The shield should rest against your shoulder. He tried again. This time it rose smoothly. His eyes widened. I did it. Emma smiled. No. You learned. The retired instructor watched silently from across the training yard. A few moments later, another figure appeared at the entrance. Nathaniel Brooks. He had arrived without ceremony, accompanied only by Captain Darius. Neither interrupted the lesson. They simply observed. The little boy completed another successful movement before running back toward the other pages. Emma turned to retrieve her basket. Only then did she notice the king. She bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty." Nathaniel glanced toward the children. "You teach now." Emma shook her head. "I only answered a question." Nathaniel smiled faintly. "It seems people ask you many questions lately." She laughed softly. "I suppose they do." As they walked together through the garden paths, several servants paused their work. Not because the king was passing, because the king had chosen to walk beside a former waitress as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Nathaniel noticed the curious looks. "They're still surprised." Emma answered honestly. "So am I." He looked ahead. "They shouldn't be." She said nothing. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt earned. Near the castle chapel, they encountered an elderly gardener struggling to lift a heavy water barrel. Before any guard could react, Nathaniel stepped forward and grasped one side. Emma instinctively took the other. Together they carried it across the narrow pathway. The old gardener blinked in astonishment. "My king." Nathaniel simply nodded. "Everyone carries something." The gardener bowed repeatedly after they left. Emma glanced sideways. "Kings usually don't carry water barrels." Nathaniel answered without looking at her. "They also usually don't survive assassination attempts because a waitress refused to stay silent." Emma lowered her eyes. "I don't think those things are connected." "They are." Nathaniel stopped beside the castle pond. For several quiet moments he watched ripples spread across the water. Power has a way of convincing rulers they see everything. He finally said, "You reminded me that they don't." Emma looked at the reflection of the autumn sky. "My father used to say." She smiled gently at the memory. People standing closest to the ground noticed the first cracks in the road. Nathaniel nodded slowly. "Your father was a wise man. So was your mother." Emma looked surprised. Nathaniel continued, "I've spoken with the women who worked beside you. They all said the same thing. When someone was hungry, you shared your meal. When someone was afraid, you listened. When someone failed, you never mocked them." He met her eyes. "You didn't become courageous on the night you warned me. You had been living that way long before either of us realized it." For the first time since everything had begun, Emma felt something deeper than relief. She felt understood, not because she had saved a king, but because someone had finally seen the quiet life she had lived before anyone thought it mattered. History rarely remembers the feast. It remembers the quiet person who changed what happened afterward. Winter arrived early that year. A thin blanket of snow covered the towers of Blackthorn Castle, softening the hard lines of stone that had witnessed betrayal only months before. Inside the great kitchens, warmth replaced the bitter cold outside. Fresh bread baked in massive ovens. Stew simmered in iron pots. Laughter, once rare among the servants, had slowly returned. Emma stood beside a long wooden table, helping two young kitchen girls knead bread. Neither had known how to read when they first arrived. Now both practiced simple words written with charcoal across small wooden boards while waiting for dough to rise. Emma corrected one letter gently. "Not like this." She smiled. "Curve the line first." The younger girl nodded eagerly. "I'll try again." Across the room, older servants exchanged quiet smiles. The reading lessons Emma had requested months earlier had become part of every morning. No royal decree had announced them. No noble had ordered them. They simply began because one waitress believed every servant deserved the chance to learn. Footsteps echoed through the kitchen. Captain Darius entered. The room immediately fell silent. He approached Emma with his usual composed expression. "His Majesty requests your company." Several young servants exchanged excited glances after he spoke. Emma simply wiped the flour from her hands. "I'll be there shortly." Nathaniel waited inside the old castle library. Tall windows overlooked snow-covered forests stretching beyond the kingdom. Ancient books lined every wall from floor to ceiling. Emma entered quietly. "You wish to see me, Your Majesty?" Nathaniel looked up from an open ledger. "I did." He closed the book. "I've spent the morning reviewing the annual accounts." Emma waited patiently. "The repairs to the servants' quarters are complete." She smiled softly. "Thank you. The new kitchen roof has already survived its first snowfall." She nodded. I heard no one needed buckets this week. Nathaniel almost smiled. And the schoolroom? Emma looked genuinely pleased. 23 servants attend regularly. 6 already read better than I did at their age. Nathaniel walked slowly toward one of the frost-covered windows. For years, he said quietly, I believe protecting this kingdom meant strengthening its walls. Emma joined him beside the window. And now, he looked across the snowy courtyard below. Now I think kingdoms become stronger when the people inside them stop believing they are invisible. Emma remained silent. Some truths needed no response. Nathaniel turned back toward the library table. Resting upon it lay a carefully carved wooden plaque bearing the royal wolf crest. He picked it up. This room beside the kitchens, he said. It has belonged to no one for decades. Emma listened quietly. I've ordered it restored. She looked at him with curiosity. Nathaniel placed the carved plaque into her hands. Across its polished surface were engraved simple words. House of Learning for every servant. For every child. For anyone who wishes to read. Emma traced the carved letters with trembling fingers. I don't deserve this. Nathaniel answered immediately. It isn't a reward. It's a continuation. You saw value where others saw only servants. I simply made room for that value to grow. Snowflakes drifted silently beyond the windows. Emma looked once more at the plaque. Not because her name appeared nowhere upon it, but because it didn't need to. The room would belong to everyone. Exactly as she had hoped. Nathaniel watched her quietly. Months earlier, she had slipped a folded note beneath a wine goblet to save his life. Today, without realizing it, she had changed something far greater than one king's fate. She had changed the future of the people no one had ever thought to notice. And Nathaniel understood that long after songs about battles had faded, long after the story of a failed assassination had become legend, the greatest legacy left within Blackthorn Castle would not be a throne, a crown, or even a king. It would be the courage of one ordinary waitress who believed that every unnoticed life was worth protecting, and inspired an entire kingdom to believe the same. People often ask when a kingdom truly changed. Those who lived through it always gave the same answer. They simply smiled and spoke the name of a waitress. Several years passed. Blackthorn Castle remained as magnificent as ever, its stone towers rising proudly above forests that had witnessed countless winters. Travelers still admired its strength. Foreign rulers still respected its armies. But visitors who stayed long enough noticed something far more unusual. The servants smiled. Young boys and girls carried books through the castle corridors. Kitchen workers could sign their own names. Stable hands discussed history while feeding horses. Pages practiced reading beside veteran soldiers. The House of Learning never closed. Every evening its windows glowed with candlelight. Emma Carter still unlocked the classroom herself every morning. She had refused titles. She had refused wealth. She had refused noble lands. Instead, she accepted something much greater. Responsibility. Inside the classroom, children from servant families gathered around long wooden tables. Some struggled with their first letters. Others had already begun reading ancient stories from worn leather-bound books. Emma moved quietly from desk to desk. Very good. She corrected one sentence. Try that word again. Another child proudly finished reading an entire page without stopping. The room filled with applause. No one noticed the visitor standing silently outside the doorway. Nathaniel Brooks. He had arrived without guards, without ceremony, without announcing himself. He simply watched. Not the teacher. The students. Their confidence. Their laughter. Their belief that they belonged inside these castle walls just as much as anyone born into nobility. Emma finally noticed him. She smiled warmly. Class, she said. We have a guest. The children stood respectfully. Nathaniel raised one hand gently. Please, sit. They obeyed. One little girl raised her hand with complete innocence. Your Majesty. Nathaniel nodded. Yes. Is it true Miss Emma saved your life? The room became perfectly still. Emma looked embarrassed. Nathaniel looked at the children one by one before answering. Yes. Another little boy frowned thoughtfully. Were you frightened? Several children giggled quietly. Nathaniel smiled. I was. The answer surprised them. So brave people get scared too? Nathaniel looked toward Emma before replying. They do. The difference is, he spoke softly, they choose to do the right thing anyway. The children remembered every word. Years later, Many of them would repeat that lesson to their own families. When the class ended, the children hurried outside into the bright afternoon snow. Emma closed the final book. Nathaniel remained near the window. "They don't look at you like a hero," he observed. Emma smiled. "I hope not. They look at you like home." Silence settled comfortably between them. Beyond the window, laughter echoed across the snowy courtyard. The first students from servant families were now old enough to become royal clerks, healers, craftsmen, and teachers. Not because someone had changed who they were, because someone had finally given them the chance to become who they could be. Nathaniel looked toward Emma. "That note," he said quietly. "I once believed it saved only one life." Emma tilted her head. "And now?" He watched the children running through the snow with books tucked beneath their arms. "Now I know it saved generations." Emma followed his gaze. Neither spoke again. No words were necessary. Far away, songs would always remember the Alpha King who escaped an assassination. But inside Blackthorn Castle, where ordinary people lived ordinary lives, a different story endured. It was the story of a quiet waitress who noticed what no one else saw, found the courage to slip a single folded note beneath a king's glass, and prove that the greatest power in any kingdom does not begin with a crown. It begins with one ordinary person choosing to do the right thing when everyone else remains silent. And because she did, Blackthorn Castle never became famous for the trap that nearly claimed its king. It became legendary for the waitress who changed an entire kingdom with 7 handwritten words.